All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, um, today we're going to be continuing where and what we left off at. Let's just go over really quick, just so that we understand where we're at and so forth. So yesterday we started out with point number 3 for this ayah. Which ayah was it? Let's look at it really quick. We're going to zoom out really quick. So we're at this ayah, قُلْ إِنَّنِي هَدَانِي رَبِّي إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. So basically, where was it? Right there. This is قُلْ إِنَّنِي هَدَانِي رَبِّي إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ دِينًا, and we said قِيَمًا or قَيِّمًا in a different قراءة. Right? We said قِيَمًا or قَيِّمًا in a different قراءة. وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي or وَنُسْكِي وَمَحْيَايَ ومحياي or ومحياي or ومحياي ومماتي إلى لله رب العالمين, and we went in details with that one. لا شريك له. So we are basically taking this portion all right, and up till here. And then we said that al-Qurtubi said that there were 4 different matters regarding this one. Number 1, he basically talked about the different qira'at, and dinan and qayyiman and qiyaman and millata Ibrahim Hanifa. We talked about the word Hanifa. That was the day before. And we talked about mahyaya wa mamati and what that entails and how the word mahyaya is different than hayati. So, and we also talked about the word lillah, that was the day before, and where the word Allah comes from. Is it waliha? Is it aliha? Is it conjugated from something, or is it in itself basically the word right there? Rabbil Alameen, we talked about the word Rabb in comparison with the word Khaliq, which means creator, and Al-Alameen. We talked about al-alam to being in itself really plural, but al-alamin is plural of for the plural, basically. We also talked about point number 3. That was what we were doing yesterday. And we said al-Tabari, who basically is Shafi'i. We did talk about him before, so didn't need to bring him up again. And we went in details about one important thing that al-Qurtubi wanted to talk about, which basically relates to some legislature. And what was that? Is it obligatory to do certain dhikr or certain du'as or certain supplications basically before doing al-Fatiha? So basically starting with Allahu Akbar and then doing a certain supplication, such as at-tawjih, which basically means direction, but this would be at least let's call it the shortened version of it. وجهت وجهي الذي فطر السماوات والأرض حنيفا وما أنا من المشركين إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين. And basically continue it, لا شريك له وبذلك أمرت وأنا أول المسلمين. Okay, that was the short version. In another version, of course, in Sahih Muslim, basically a longer version, وجهت وجهي, and we basically read it last time, so no need to read it again. And we also said that the debate was, number 1, whether it's obligatory to make such du'as, number 2, or is it a sunnah, or number 3, is it mustahab, or an opinion 4, that it would be a sunnah to perhaps say it before starting salah and not necessarily before the Fatiha. Okay, so what does that mean? That before I start salah, here it is, I'm standing وجهت وجهي الذي فطر السماوات والأرض before even saying Allahu Akbar. Okay, that was the first opinion. Okay, and basically, or that was the last opinion. And then after Allahu Akbar, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wait a minute, did you just say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and not directly Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen? Is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, is it part of the Fatiha or not? That's differences of opinions between scholars, just a note. I'm not going to go in that huge debate. Amongst them, is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim supposed to be included in the Fatiha or is it not? That's basically a debate between scholars, but at the end of the day, just know that both opinions are considerable opinions. My recommendation is say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim as part of the Fatiha. Okay, now we see the differences of opinions on whether we're speaking about this tawjih or even dua al-istiftah. And we're going to talk about that in just a bit. Okay, whether that is also included or not. So I'm just letting you know the differences of opinions. If you want to make it short and just Allahu Akbar and go directly to your Fatiha, you're absolutely fine. And in fact, even the scholars that recommended that you would read this dua, they would all agree that if you just stick to Allahu Akbar and read al-Fatiha, at least, as the beginning, that all scholars agreed that your salah is still valid. Okay? Your salah is still valid. No one ever said that this is a pillar. Okay? No one ever said that this was a pillar. But then they disagreed on how important it is to say it. But then no one ever said it was a pillar, and therefore, if you don't say it, then your prayer is invalid. And we also talked about the differences of opinions between scholars if you were to hold something and read it, and perhaps maybe if you were to hold something like your phone and read it off your phone or read it off a paper, or probably put the paper on the ground and just, I guess, in big bold letters and read it that way. And we talked about that as well. We also talked about the word labbaik wa sa'daik and what that really means. وَالشَّرُّ لَيْسَ إِلَيْكَ, and we said شَرُّ لَيْسَ إِلَيْكَ is two opinions between scholars. The first one, الشَّرُّ لَيْسَ إِلَيْكَ, that we don't attribute evil to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the first opinion. The second opinion is that الشَّرُّ لَيْسَ إِلَيْكَ to basically mean that we would not use or do evil to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, so those are basically the two opinions. Let's say right there. So right there, we also talked about Abu al-Faraj al-Jawzi, and we went in details with his, with at least his, talking about him, whether, where he lived and what he was famous for, and all the notorious things that he had basically been or was considered a very important scholar for. He is a Hanbali madhab. I think I forgot to mention that one. And the other thing about Abu al-Faraj al-Jawzi, we talked about his son being an alcoholic and selling his books for alcohol, basically, and that affecting him, of course, psychologically, and certainly later on, he paid the price of this son being the bad son. Okay, let's see. We didn't continue the rest of that portion when we're speaking about, okay, well, they had differences of opinions on whether you have to say that dua, but I thought it would be good to just really quick go over some of their details. Okay, so for Imam Malik, he basically said the Prophet ﷺ had taught al-A'rabi, and we said about the word al-A'rabi, we said al-A'rabi is basically a Bedouin. And the Bedouins, they basically live away from the city. They have a very simple life, definitely lacking social skills. So this man comes in to the masjid and then he urinates in the masjid. Well, basically because he didn't know that if you want to do your natural business, you basically do it outside. He's just used to being out, and about in nature. So he thought, well, here we go. We can just do it anywhere. So when he came in Medina, he basically urinates in the masjid, and then he was surprised that all the Sahaba were coming at him. Sahaba were basically, let's say, scurrying to stop him. They go after him, and then the Prophet ﷺ tells them, "Da'u wadnu alayhi dhanuban min al-ma." Just leave him, let him continue, and just get a bucket of water, splash it wherever he did his business in, and then you basically, just let him do his business. Well, of course, some Sahaba, I guess, they heard the Prophet ﷺ say da'u. Other Sahaba, probably they just didn't, I guess, hear him, or who knows what happened. But at the end of the day, is that that man was definitely startled. He was definitely startled from their behavior. That's when the Prophet ﷺ basically approaches him after he's all done, and the Prophet ﷺ basically teaches him the tahara in the place and where and what this place is all about. And then he tells him, إِذَا قُمْتَ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ فَكَبِّرْ ثُمَّ اقْرَأ. If you stand for prayer, you basically Allahu Akbar, and then you read, and then you recite, etc. Is this story related to the story of that man that urinated in the masjid, or is this another story of the man, which is the hadith al-Musi' fi salatih? Al-Musi' fi salatih, it's another story about another Arabi as well, or perhaps maybe maybe another Arabi, maybe the some Arabi, we just know that it's an Arabi. Okay, that he basically starts and basically prays in a very fast way, barely makes sujood, barely makes ruku', and then the Prophet ﷺ basically tells him every single time that he was finished with his salah, tells him that he still did not pray, did not complete his prayer, and then he comes back again and does the same exact thing a couple times. That's when the Prophet ﷺ basically teaches him that when إذا قمت إلى الصلاة فكبر ثم اقرأ. That's when the Prophet ﷺ teaches him, if you stand for prayer, then do the beginning of salah, كبر, say Allahu Akbar, and then recite basically the salah. And he said, well, he didn't say sabbih. He didn't say, read something like Subhanakallahum bihamdika tabarak ismuka wa ta'ala jadduk wa la ilaha ghayruk. We're going to get that again. All right. And that's just basically the same opinion that Abu Hanifa basically said, that this is not obligatory. And similarly, he said, well, he didn't say, quote, وجهت وجهي الذي فطر السماوات والأرض, as of course claimed by Shafi'i. All are great scholars. Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Sister, some scholars say it is bid'ah, but I don't know.
No scholar ever said it was that to that level. So even the Hanbalis, they didn't say it was a bid'ah, but then they had differences of opinions on whether, like I said, it's obligatory sunnah or mustahab, but not a level to the level of bid'ah. All right, let's see right there. Ubay, the Prophet ﷺ teaches him كيف تقرأ إذا افتتحت الصلاة. قال قلت الله أكبر الحمد لله رب العالمين. So basically, قال لأبي right there, when Ubay basically asked the Prophet ﷺ, how do you start in how, just demonstrate salah for me? And the Prophet ﷺ basically demonstrates for him and tells him, you just say Allahu Akbar and Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen without mentioning no dhikr and no supplication to do before that. And of course, just to make the story short, you could see the debate, and some of them actually said, well, Ali ibn Abi Talib actually narrated that he stood and actually said this dua. So you could see sometimes conflicting reports. Well, it can happen. It can happen that sometimes that you can have the Prophet ﷺ do one thing and some other times not do something else. Just like this hadith, روى النسائي والدارقطني, that the Prophet ﷺ كان إذا افتتح الصلاة كبر ثم يقول إن صلاتي ونسكي. So you've got another narration right there that basically said that the Prophet ﷺ, when he would start with the salah, he would say Allahu Akbar, and then he would basically say Inna salati wa nusuki, which is basically the dua that we were talking about. And that's where, of course, you had some of the scholars right here, qulna, that means the Malikis. They said, well, what we would consider, and explain why this hadith was narrated, that basically is involving salat qiyam al-layl. That's how they explained it. So they said, we're not objecting that this hadith is actually authentic and accurate. They just disagreed that it's necessarily based in the five daily prayers. They said, well, what we regard that, to explain this hadith, that was more likely to be in a qiyam al-layl than one of the 5 daily prayers, and their evidence was in this hadith, as in Nasa'i, right there on Abi Sa'id, Kana Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is how they supported it. They said, we've got another hadith that Abu Sa'id said that the Prophet sallam كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا افتتح الصلاة بالليل قال سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وتبارك اسمك وتعالى جدك ولا إله غيرك. That was their evidence. They said right there, we've got this hadith basically that was mentioned by Abu Sa'id, that the Prophet ﷺ, whenever he would start the salah at night, so we're talking about during Qiyam al-Layl, that he would say Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik wa tabarak asmuk wa ta'ala jadduk wa la ilaha ghayruk. Let me explain what that dua means. Subhanak means there's nothing compared, nothing like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that nothing compared to the praise that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that is supposed to be getting this praise, and his name stands high, and his power. When you say jadduk, this isn't talking about grandfather, but this is talking about might, this is talking about power, this is talking about authority. So ta'ala jadduk, meaning your might, your authority, your power is beyond all. وَلَا إِلَهَ غَيْرُكَ. And there is no Lord, or actually there is no God other than you. There's no deity other than you. And certainly you could see, you could see these, you could see this dua, and I think most people had memorized it. You can see it's not pretty long, but of course, they said that is al-Maliki. They said this can be done in any nafila. What's in nafila? In nafila is basically any prayer that is not the obligatory prayer, meaning the 5 daily prayers. So whether you called it Salat al-Kusuf, whether it was Salat al-Duha, whether it was Salat al-Qiyam al-Layl, all of that is considered nafila. Okay, so the Malikis, they regarded that recommendation would be for a nafila prayer and not for an obligatory prayer. Okay, so let's see. And why is that the case? They said, well, in nafila is basically at least akhaf min al-fard. Okay, what does that mean? So al-fard has very, let's call it strict conditions on how it's done. But in nafila, the conditions are, let's say, more lenient. So let's say you wanted to pray sitting down, even though you are capable of standing. For a nafila, you could actually do that, even if you didn't have a reason, or at least, let's say, a strict reason that you have severe back pain or severe joint pain, etc. Then in that situation, in a nafila prayer, even if you didn't have a reason to sit down other than you just felt like sitting down, in a nafila or in a non-obligatory prayer, you can sit down. And same thing if you're talking about, let's say you're driving, or not driving, but at least in the car, because if you're driving, you got to pay attention to that one. But let's say you're sitting down in the car and you are waiting right there, or probably on the bus, and you wanted to pray on the bus, even though you are capable of standing. But for nafila, you just wanted to do extra prayers rather than scroll on your phone, and you just wanted to do extra prayers, even if you did not face the qibla. So many scholars will say, well, that's okay if she's not capable of facing the qibla while she is on the train, or probably in her car or whatever, or in the car, for example. Then they said if it's a nafila prayer, that's okay. But for an obligatory prayer, they said no, you have to stand if you're capable of standing, and you got to hop out of that at least transportation method that you're in and basically pray. Okay, so that's seeing those opinions. That's why they said it is أخف من الفرض. What does that have to do with anything? So they said, since you're speaking of something that is going to have less dhikr, less of that, then they said, well, what that would mean is basically that these supplications and these dua are basically to even off, to even off the different things that you probably reduced from prayer. That's why they basically consider that those du'as are basically in a nafila and not an obligatory prayer. They consider that that's to even it off because you're doing less restrictions compared to that. Okay, let's see. And that's basically what they said. Okay, let's see right here. روى النسائي عن محمد ibn Maslama. Here's a name. Who's Muhammad ibn Maslama? Is that like a Sahabi or what is he? Okay, that's what we're going to look at right here, inshallah. Muhammad ibn Maslama was actually a Sahabi. Let's look at Muhammad ibn Maslama and just get some information. Who is he and why was he even mentioned right there? So we're going to go for Muhammad ibn Maslama and just get some information because we don't want to skip his name. And by the way, is it Muhammad was he born before, like during Jahiliyyah or before Islam, or what happened? Yes, he was born during the time of Jahiliyyah, and there was a name Muhammad too. Yes, there was. Only 4 people were named Muhammad, and Muhammad ibn Maslama happens to be one of them. Okay, let's see what his name is. So Ibn Salama ibn Khalid ibn Adi ibn Majda'a. Okay, and it was said that his name was Abu Abdurrahman, at least that's his nickname, and he was من نجباء الصحابة شهد بدرا والمشاهد. So he was one of the key Sahaba, and he even had attended Badr meaning the Battle of Badr. All right, another thing. The Prophet ﷺ had also put him as a leader at one point when the Prophet ﷺ went off and joined the army. He basically had put Muhammad ibn Maslama to be that leader on Medina. Okay, so kind of like a deputy. Muhammad ibn Maslama, he basically had decided to stay away from the dispute that was happening between Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan and Ali ibn Abi Talib. He completely isolated himself from that. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned in a hadith, we're probably going to see it right there, that no fitna will harm him. So what did he do? And he basically did not attend the Battle of Al-Jamal. We'll talk about that one day. And Wala Sifin. Okay, Wala Sifin, basically the main 2 battles between Ali ibn Abi Talib and Muawiyah over al-Khilafah right there. But instead of taking a sword of steel or metal, he basically made a sword made of wood, which is a way to say, I'm not going to join in all of this. I am basically armed. I don't have any arms. And in other words, I don't have any weapons. All right. And then he moved to Al-Rabada, which basically is where Jundub ibn Junada or Abu Dharr al-Ghifari was also there as well. And then unfortunately, I guess someone from Jordan completely dislikes that Muhammad ibn Maslama decided not to join either and actually went and killed him. I guess even when you say don't want to be part of this fitna or part of this dispute, they'll still create a way to basically make you responsible and basically killed him. Okay, so I'm not going to continue with Muhammad ibn Maslama, but just remember there, Muhammad ibn Maslama. Let's read just at least the part about Muhammad ibn Maslama. He said, I passed by the Prophet ﷺ when he was on a Safa. Safa is basically the mountain of Safa. Right now, they don't have a mountain. It's just a small area that they basically have there. And the Prophet ﷺ, he had his hand over this man. And then he basically, oh, and then he, basically was told, why did you, the Prophet ﷺ, sorry, tells him, why did you not become Muslim? What is making you not become Muslim? Okay. قلت يا رسول الله فعلت بهذا الرجل شيئا ما فعلته بأحد. You had done something with this man that you had never done with anyone else. And I did not want to interrupt your conversation. Who was that man that you were with? And he said that was Jibril. And then قال لي هذا محمد بن مسلمة لم يسلم. Oh, sorry, I confused the story. So okay, sorry, I confused the story. Okay, Jibril Jibril tells the Prophet ﷺ هذا محمد ibn Maslama lam yuslam. Muhammad ibn Maslama did not yet become Muslim. But if he were to become Muslim, we would have responded his salam. And then he said, فَمَا قَالَ لَكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. And he tells him, what did he tell you? He said, he basically told me to take care of my neighbors until I basically thought that he was going to be one of the people to basically inherit from him. And of course, that was something that encouraged Muhammad ibn Maslama to become Muslim when he had seen that Islam is basically basically based on akhlaq. So Muhammad ibn Maslama then becomes Muslim. Okay, let's see right there. The most important thing, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كان إذا قام يصلي تطوعا. Here's that point. And of course, you could see this hadith is in al-Mujtaba. Al-Mujtaba, it's basically this. Al-Mujtaba lin-Nasa'i. It's almost in 8 volumes, huge volumes, not just any 8 volumes. Okay, let's see. And he said, that was Muhammad ibn Maslama, he basically said that the Prophet ﷺ, when he would stand for salah, but it is the non-obligatory salah, he would say, Allahu Akbar. وجهت وجهي للذي فطر السماوات والأرض حنيفا وما أنا من المشركين إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين لا شريك له وبذلك أمرت وأنا أول المسلمين اللهم أنت الملك لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك. And then he would read basically al-Fatiha and so forth. What does that dua mean? Allahu Akbar, that's basically Allahu Akbar, that's the beginning of Salat, that's basically Takbirat al-Ihram. I face my face to the one that created the heavens and the earth as worshipping one God Almighty, and I am not amongst the mushrikeen, basically the ones that associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My prayers, my rituals, my life, my death, and everything that was given to me during my life and my death. In other words, all my investment towards my life and my death is for Allah, the Lord of the worlds. No, I do not associate partners with him, and I was ordered to do just that, and I am amongst the first Muslims. O Lord Almighty, you are the King. There's no God worthy of worship but you. There's no one like unto you, and no one deserving the praise as you. Okay, and you could say, in the Malikis, they said, well, see, we've got our evidence right there, and that this, Muhammad ibn Maslama, he basically made it clear that this was in Salat al-Tatawwu', in a non-obligatory prayer, and then he said, وَإِن صَحَّ أَنَّ ذَلِكَ كَانَ فِي الْفَرِيضَةِ بَعْدَ التَّكْبِيرِ فَيُحْمَلُ عَلَى الْجَوَازِ وَالِاسْتِحْبَابِ. So they said, and even if we wanted to prove that that was in an obligatory prayer, then in that situation, we will say that this would be permissible to basically make that dua in an obligatory prayer. It would be considered as permissible, not a bid'ah, or preferred. And as for what is sunnah, it is basically to read after Allahu Akbar, and basically the Fatiha itself. All right, let's see. Here's another issue right there. So now we know those, the differences of opinions, but I guess it would be good to see these ahadith all together and basically scrutinize them to see the various opinions and basically understand how they debated whether this is part of Salah or this is part of the obligatory prayer or part of a nafila and so forth. Let's see. The fourth matter that Al-Qurtubi wanted to discuss, he said, well, why does it say, وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ? I'm the first Muslims. But certainly, he wasn't necessarily the first Muslim. Wasn't Ibrahim alayhi salam and the previous prophets basically were Muslim as well? So that makes him not the first. Why is he saying وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ? That was something that that the Prophet ﷺ was supposed to say. Why say وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ? And am I going to say وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ as well? And that's where, of course, Al-Qurtubi had three responses for that. And let's see the first response. He said, well, the first response is that the Prophet ﷺ أول الخلق أجمع معنى. So basically he was saying, well, the Prophet ﷺ was basically from the time that he was in, the Prophet ﷺ, and basically when he had Islam basically revealed upon him, that was the final revelation. So since this is the final revelation, then in that situation he is the first to adopt the final revelation, and the ones that had come before, they did not have the final revelation. So therefore, he basically quoted Hadith Abu Hurairah, and he said that the Prophet ﷺ had said, نحن الآخرون الأولون يوم القيامة ونحن أول من يدخل الجنة. Let's see. He said, we are actually the end of times. So we would be the last nation, but we would be on Judgment Day, we would be the first and basically the outnumbered in the sorry, not the outnumbered, but we would be outnumbering all the other nations on Judgment Day. What do you mean outnumbering all the other nations? So we're talking about the Muslim nations, because there would be Muslim nation during the time of Prophet Nuh, but they would only be 11 people or 12 people. Okay, there would be another time probably with Prophet maybe Idris, but they might be 7 or 8. There would be another time probably with Prophet Musa, probably maybe 100,000, 200,000, who knows? But of course, when we're speaking about the Muslims as the last basically revelation, so that's when the Prophet ﷺ basically said, we are the last nation as the final revelation, but we would be the first basically on Judgment Day, and we would be the first to enter Jannah. We would be the first to enter Jannah, the first nation to enter Jannah. And you could see this hadith is in Musnad Ahmad. This hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim, and here are the numbers for it. Let's see. And وفي حديث حذيفة, hadith حذيفة, who's حذيفة? حذيفة بن اليمان. He said, نحن الآخرون من أهل الدنيا والأولون يوم القيامة المقضي لهم قبل الخلائق. Okay, in a quote that Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman had said, we are the last nation in this dunya, basically in this life, but we are the first on Judgment Day. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically rule for them before even all nations. Before all nations. Let's see. The second interpretation, why does it say وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ? He said that أَنَّهُ أَوَّلُهُمْ لِكَوْنِهِ مُقَدَّمًا فِي الْخَلْقِ عَلَيْهِمْ. Okay, that he was basically, remember, the Prophet ﷺ was created, and then in this narration that he was created, and then all the creations were created. All right. قال الله تعالى وإذ أخذنا من النبيين ميثاقهم ومنك ومن نوح. وإذ أخذنا من النبيين ميثاقهم. We had taken the strong covenant basically from all the prophets and from you and from Noah. Well, the Prophet ﷺ, chronologically speaking, did not come after Prophet Noah. He didn't come after Noah. So why did it say وَمِنْكَ وَمِن نُوح? Let's see. Qatada explains this, and he said that the Prophet ﷺ had said, كُنْتُ أول الأنبياء في الخلق وآخرهم في البعث. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the prophets, and he said, I was the first prophet to be created, but I was the last one to be resurrected. All right. So therefore, they explained that this is to explain why Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was actually described even before Prophet Nuh, وَمِنْكَ وَمِن Nuh. Why describe him as basically first, and then talk about and then talk about Nuh, because of this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Kuntu awwal al-anbiya fil khalq." I was the first, basically fil khalq, and therefore he is awwal al-muslimin, because before even the rest of the prophets were created, he was the first to be created. Let's see the third interpretation. أول المسلمين من أهل ملته. He's basically the first Muslim from basically during that time when the revelation had basically been sent to the Prophet ﷺ, that he was basically the first one to become Muslim. There were no Muslims before, at least the Prophet ﷺ, because all the different nations that had received the revelation on Islam, they had already distorted it, completely changed what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala completely changed what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed. And of course, that leads to one thing, which is when the Prophet ﷺ basically got the revelation, that was why he was أول المسلمين من أهل ملته. He was basically the first Muslim from من أهل ملته, meaning basically from the nation during that time. And that was explained by Ibn al-Arabi. There's a difference between Ibn Arabi and Ibn al-Arabi. Ibn al-Arabi is basically the Maliki scholar, and certainly, one of the greatest Maliki scholars. And he has the book Ahkam al-Quran. It's not big. It's actually in perhaps maybe in well, some copies are 3 volumes and some are in 5 volumes. So it depends on which copy you're talking about, but it's not that big. He was in Ibn al-Arabi's book Ahkam al-Quran. He is very selective on which ayat that he would do tafsir for. He would only do the ayat that relate to Islamic legislature. That's basically it. No other ayat, only the ones that relate to Islamic legislature, which is why it was in 3 volumes or 5 volumes, depending on the copy. All right, let's see. So the difference is basically when it comes to, okay, should we in the dua actually say وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, or should we not say that we are أول المسلمين? How do we explain that? So وأنا أول المسلمين, you don't have to say وأنا أول المسلمين, because certainly you are not the first, but you are وأنا من المسلمين in that situation. Now, here's one thing, is that you do see there are different narrations. Should we say وأنا أول المسلمين, or should we say just وأنا من المسلمين, just mentioning that one? Okay, let's see. Imran ibn Hussein basically mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ had said, يا فاطمة قومي فاشهدي أضحيتك. Get up and go see your udhiyah. What is al-udhiyah? Al-udhiyah is basically the dhabiha, what you would slaughter on the day of the Eid, or what you would slaughter on basically during after Hajj, or well, basically it's during Hajj, but the ritual of slaughter basically during Eid, or during Eid al-Adha, basically not any Eid, but during Eid al-Adha, and also during Hajj. So that would be the nusuk. Okay, so why did he ask her to get up and actually go see it? فإنه يغفر لك في أول قطرة من دمها كل ذنب عملته. So what does that mean? that she will basically have her sins forgiven from the first drop of blood, every single sin that she had committed. Okay, hold on. So hold on. Are we talking about just the first drop of blood? Are we talking about all of it? So that it actually says including the first drop of blood. If that means including the first drop of blood, that means because of the sacrifice that you had done for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, watch and see your udhiyah, and remember that this is going to be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and with every single drop of blood, it's going to basically be a sin remover. And then ثم قولي, and then say إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحيا ومماتي لله رب العالمين لا شريك له وبذلك أمرت وأنا أول المسلمين. And then basically make this dua. And then Umran said, يا رسول الله هذا لك ولأهل بيتك خاصة أم للمسلمين عامة? Is this just for you and your family, or is this going to be, what is this? What is he talking about? That you would basically get your sins forgiven basically from every single drop of blood that basically is coming out of that udhiyah. Is this including everybody, or is this just for al-Bayt? Is this for the Prophet's family? But the Prophet explained. So you could see Umar ibn Hussein was there to ask about this, and the Prophet said, بل للمسلمين عامة. بل للمسلمين عامة. It is actually including all the Muslims. Let's see, right there. So any questions up to until here about this ayah? You got some, inshallah. Okay, let's continue right there. قال أغير الله أبغي ربا وهو رب كل شيء ولا تكسب كل نفس إلا عليها ولا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى ثم إلى ربكم مرجعكم فينبئكم بما كنتم فيه تختلفون. Let's first give just a general translation right there and then get in details with it. قل أغير الله, and say, notice here, قل and قل. How many قل's just on this page? So we got 3 قل's on this page. Here's قل, and here's قل, and here's قل. 3 قل's on this page. Okay, let's see. قل أغير الله أبغي ربا وهو رب كل شيء. And say, do I seek other than Allah Almighty as a Lord, and He is the Lord of everything. ولا تكسب كل نفس إلا عليها. And every single soul will harvest what they had committed, basically. But if I were to translate that literally, and everyone will, or every soul will carry what it had basically committed, okay? ولا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. ولا تزر, and do not commit a sin, basically, upon another sin. So how do we do that? How do you commit a sin upon another sin? We'll explain it. And then your return is to your Lord Almighty, and He will inform you of all the different things that you had disputed about. Okay, so you could see when you look at a couple words, we need to talk about a number of different words right there, and we're going to take it bit by bit. Okay, let's say قل أغير الله أبغي ربا. So number one is that you could see that this ayah is basically related to the rest of the ayat as creating a foundation for an identity. A foundation for an identity. So what does that look like? A foundation for an identity? One, that it recognizes first, that it recognizes basically al-hasana, basically faith. And then recognizes الصراط المستقيم, recognizes the details of that aqidah, taking the moment to and study and learn what really is it standing for and what really is it based on, which is Millata Ibrahim Hanifa. And do not be amongst. And one thing that is very important to mention, it's not enough to say I am Muslim. It's extremely important to also announce that you separate yourself from the other ideologies. Let me explain something. During the times that we're living in, a time of postmodernism, and now, I guess with this Epstein files, you could say that right now things had been exposed to say that there were certain people, they could be, I mean, 3 of the Nobel Prize winners were actually in Epstein Island, okay. All right. And of course, not to mention all those influencers, whether politically or whether we're speaking about economically, or whether we're speaking about perhaps media, new, what's it called, music, all of that, we're actually there. So now, of course, we don't need to talk about conspiracy anymore because it had been exposed and it's basically right in our faces right there. And of course, we're talking about Epstein, but he's not the only one. This had been going on for quite a while, and this is not new. And certainly, this was something that was done even before Epstein was even born. Okay, so this whole thing that was basically directing the world in that direction, and basically putting these certain leaders and certain ideas, certain thoughts, that was actually tracing back to a certain time. Anyhow, don't want to get into that piece of it, but in the end, is that when we're speaking about قل إنني هداني ربي إلى صراط مستقيم دينا قيما ملة إبراهيم حنيفة. Remember, it's important to, one, recognize what you belong to, but you also want to disassociate yourself from the different trends of different religions. So what does that look like? The time that we're living in, with the age of postmodernism, which basically is the age of atheism, and certainly where everything is relative and you're expected to be inclusive and in your language do what is called political correctness. So what do we mean by political correctness? Well, that's just a nice way of being diplomatic and and not objecting to other people's faiths or other people's interpretations of the world and ethics and all of that. So you practice some form of inclusivity because you don't want to appear rude. So you practice some form of a soft language in how you address different religions, you address different paths, you address different cultures, you address different ways, whether that was the LGBT or whether that was perhaps maybe the feminist or whether that was an atheist, or the list goes on, that you practice somewhat of a political correctness. Well, in Islam, it basically tells you, no, you have to, there are a number of different borders that you have to set. There's a difference. There's a difference between basically setting a border that I am not part of this faith, and that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to start killing and attacking. I'm basically letting you and letting myself know that the other paths of whatever, whether we're speaking about postmodernism, liberalism, and communism, the different isms out there, that, sorry, I disagree with this point of view. And to say sorry, somehow, this isn't necessarily to be apologetic, but this is to be letting the other person know that I am not here going to somehow, feel that, oh, I hope I don't hurt your feelings. At the end of the day, is that as a Muslim, I disagree with these views. I disagree with these ideas. I disagree with these cultures. I disagree with this. وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Say it loud and clear, and do not be apologetic, do not be ashamed, and do not practice political correctness every single time that somehow just continuously just trying to let the other person know that you're going to be inclusive, you don't mean to harm people, sorry, I don't mean to be, to be rude to you, but, you have your right to practice the way. I'm not telling you to force your religion or Islam onto anybody, but why do you have to continue basically apologizing? And this is one key thing within our society now, even the Muslim society, is that they're always being apologetic about their faith, of which is this one, وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, or that وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, that لا شريك له. Announce your aqidah loud and clear. Announce your aqidah and do not be apologetic. Do not be apologetic about your aqidah, that yes, you may dislike what I'm saying, but this is what I believe. You may disagree with what I'm believing, but this is what I will be embracing, and this is what I basically believe wholeheartedly as the truth. And yes, I do not believe that what you are practicing is necessarily that it is in favor for people's interest or in favor of justice or social justice or all of those different things, and say it loud and clear, and rather than being very shy about it. Okay, so this is one key thing, is that stand with no political correctness, but that doesn't mean with no political correctness for people to understand the dichotomy of this and basically say, oh, so that means you're going to be attacking. It doesn't mean I'm then going to be attacking. It just lets people know that I am firm in the stances of Aqidah and Sharia, in what I basically believe in what I practice. This isn't to use a dichotomy and say, if you don't do that, that means you're going to be attacking. That means I'm going to be killing people. Nope, that's what they were trying to portray you, but you don't have to feel or fall for this portrayal, and that feel that, oh, if I don't say the way that they want me to say it, and if I don't use a politically correct language, and if I don't appear inclusive, then I'm going to be appearing as a terrorist. No, don't appear as a terrorist, and don't appear as a person that is fragile in their faith. لا إفراط ولا تفريط. I'm not asking you to go kill people if they disagree with you, but guess what? They are the ones to hold basically this type of terrorizing you, that if you don't adopt this political correctness language, that means you are rude, that means you are basically not inclusive, and so forth. So that's one thing. قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَبْغِي رَبًّا وَهُوَ رَبُّ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. You could see right here that this sentence, قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَبْغِي رَبًّا. Should I seek any other Lord? And how is it? This isn't a question. This isn't an interrogative clause, but this is basically to show his objection, to say, why would I worship another Lord when, so this is basically right there, وَهُوَ رَبُّ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. Why should I seek another Lord when he's actually the Lord of everything? وَلَا تَكْسِبُ كُلُّ نَفْسٍ إِلَّا عَلَيْهَا. Okay, now we go back to al-Qurtubi and see what he wanted to say in regards to that ayah. Okay, let's see. قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَبْغِي رَبًّا وَهُوَ رَبُّ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. What does the word Rabb actually mean? Let's see what al-Qurtubi wanted to say. So the word Rabb actually means that he is the owner of everything. So why should I seek ownership when he is the owner of everything? Let's see, why did he say that? He said it was narrated, and I want to look at this word that he used, ruwiya. When you see ruwiya, that is an indication that al-Qurtubi had basically considered that this narration is not necessarily authentic, but he wanted to say it. That il-Kuffar they came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Irja' ya Muhammad ila dinina wa'bud alihatana واترك ما أنت عليه ونحن نتكفل لك بكل تباعة تتوقعها في دنياك وآخرتك. فنزلت الآية وهي استفهام يقتضي التقرير والتوبيخ. Okay, let's see. This is not included. This is basically al-Qurtubi explaining. Okay, let's see. That the kuffar, or the disbelievers, they came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, abandon your faith, O Muhammad, and worship our gods and leave what you're basically adopting, and we will guarantee with every single thing that you would expect in this life and the hereafter will basically guarantee it for you. Just leave the mission and leave the faith basically that you are proselytizing right there. That's when this ayah was revealed. And he says, وَهِيَ اسْتِفْهَامٌ يَقْتَضِي التَّقْرِيرَ وَالتَّوْبِيخ. And it may appear as it is an interrogative clause, but it is not an interrogative clause. It is a taqrir. It is basically an informative clause, and also a tawbih. What is it, tawbih? Tawbih is basically to not necessarily belittle per se, but it basically is to let the other person know that by exposing their ideology or by exposing their path. Okay, so here's the word. When you say right there, so this, you could see al-Qurtubi wanted to say that wasn't necessarily at least proven as authentic, at least in that narration per se, but certainly we know that whether in different ayat or whether in different hadith, that was something that the disbelievers did propose to the Prophet ﷺ to leave speaking about the revelation, to leave speaking about Islam, and that was going to be something that was going to keep him secure. He was going to be safe, and they will guarantee him, giving him women, giving him money, giving him everything if they were to do that. Okay, let's see. وَلَا تَكْسِبُ كُلُّ نَفْسٍ إِلَّا عَلَيْهَا. Okay, what is وَلَا تَكْسِبُ? So تَكْسِب actually means to gain something. Every soul here is this talking about nafs to mean, now the word nafs has multiple meanings. Nafs can mean what makes a person alive, الروح. Nafs can mean basically the various, let's say, stages of what the nafs can contain in terms of its closeness, it's how basically close and how far it is away from basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's when you get, is that necessarily as a phase, or is that a development that one person can be nafs al-mutma'inna, and another person can be nafs al-lawama, and another person can have the nafs al-ammara bisu, the nafs that basically is continuously ordering him to do what is wrong. Differences of opinions between scholars on whether these are developments that we develop, each and every single individual basically having these three phases. So in other words, with that being said, the first opinion basically said, no, in nafs al-mutma'inna, you have it, but you have to basically work toward strengthening it, making it as really your identity. What is in nafs al-mutma'inna? In nafs al-mutma'inna is basically the nafs, the soul that is content, the soul that is living in a state of tranquility. When you say tranquility, you're speaking about that they are confident, that they are strong, that they are determined, that they are based on faith, and that despite all the predicaments in life, despite all the challenges, despite every single thing that might be happening to them, they are basically content, they are strong, they are confident, they are holding on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that nothing is going to make them be wary or probably be off that foundation of faith. That's the first one. That's النفس المطمئنة. Where did this ayah appear? يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية. It is راضية and مرضية. What is it راضية for? It's راضية whether we're speaking about the different things that happened, or راضية with Shariat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is راضي? راضي actually means content. What is content? Happy. What is happy? And what is content and happy about what? It's basically living in a state of stability, in a state of tranquility. That's radiyatan mardiyah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically content upon them as well. All right, let's see. And this is in nafs al-mutma'inna. The second one is in nafs al-lawwama. Or let me talk about in nafs al-amara bis-su' first. In nafs al-amara bis-su' is, in that first opinion, is that we all have it. You're sitting down and basically probably getting a thought come to you. Not every bad thought is necessarily coming from shaitan. Some bad thoughts are coming from what you had been exposing yourself to. This person, whenever they're alone online, they get access to laptops or access to online or anything, they go to the wrong websites. And then these ideas, they would basically come to them, etc. Well, you had been exposing yourself to these, these low materials that right now, when you're alone, it's not necessarily shaitan that brought those ideas for you. It's the chemistry in your brain and in your heart that basically brought it back to the surface, because it's a nafs al-ammara bis-su'. You feed that, and it will basically start ordering you and motivating you to act in whatever feeds its basically desire. Okay, so that's a nafs al-ammara bis-su'. What did you feed it? What did you give it? What did you, let's say, strengthen which side of yourself? That's in nafs al-ammara bis-su'. So do we all have a nafs al-ammara bis-su'? Or is it a stage that we can be living in? That's the differences of opinions. Number three, in nafs al-lawwama. In nafs al-lawwama is in between in nafs al-ammara bis-su' and between nafs al-mutma'inna. So it's trying, it recognizes that it had its failed moments, it had its shortcomings, but then they're trying to improve. So what do? They basically lawwama. So they do what is wrong. Their friend was probably talking to them to do something wrong, and they follow them, and they basically do not know how to be confident and tell them not to do such a thing. And certainly, the people that are wannabes, or the people that end up basically having their friends recommend bad things to them and they follow them, those aren't leaders. The leaders are the ones to basically make the decision, and the ones to basically set the path for others. And that's what Islam wants to create. Islam wants to create leaders. But it can happen that one may let their own nafs ammara bis-su' at one point actually be leaders in doing what is wrong. Remember, خياركم في الجاهلية خياركم في الإسلام. The best of you, and we're not talking about the best, meaning but during Jahiliyyah, but we're speaking about those that had lived in the time of Jahiliyyah, are basically the strongest when they embrace repentance and when they embrace Islam. They become the strongest in setting the grounds to even lead others to faith, lead others to repentance. And we see that all the time. They would be the ones, inmates in prisons, and then they would be the ones to give da'wah even better than scholars. Why? Because they know all the ins and outs for those people that went the wrong way, and they know how to talk to their hearts. They know what's on their minds. They know all those ideas that they had been manipulated in, whether through their friends or whether through their own nafs or whether through other people that are living their lifestyle, and they know how to basically refute those manipulations that they are living in. خياركم في الجاهلية خياركم في الإسلام. Even though that's not an authentic hadith, but we see it in practice. Okay, let's see. So when you look at in nafs al-lawama, what does it live in? It basically lives in a moment of lawm. What is lawm? A moment of blame. Was it blaming others? No, it's blaming itself. Oh, why did I do this? They were trying to be good, and then, they failed at this time, and another day they didn't do a good job, and they failed again and failed again, and the third and a fourth and a fifth time. Okay. So remember that guy that killed 100 people, and he was wanting to repent, but then I guess that man that was a abid, that was some kind of an ascetic or a monk, he told him that there was no hope for him to repent and his repentance would get accepted because you had already killed what? You were a serial killer right there. You already killed 99 people. And then he tops them off with 100. And then, but he's still insisting. He's feeling that nafs al-lawama was coming to him. There's room for repentance. Maybe you need to ask someone else right now if there is room and what you need to do. That's when he goes to a scholar, and the scholar basically would give him the recommendation to move to another city. Moves to another city and not yet officially moved, but he took the official steps to move. But certainly on the inside, he was living in nafs al-lawama. He was living that moment of blaming himself and feeling guilty about the sin that he had committed. Now, when a person is in that stage, they're actually going to be, if they would insist on blaming themselves and recognizing the guilt, and then doing istighfar, then trying to put in these baby steps to basically get on the right track and do the right thing, that's what will take them to in nafs al-mutma'inna. Now, going back to the differences of opinions. The differences of opinions is that me, myself, I have a nafs ammara bisu, and I have a nafs al-lawama, and I also have a nafs al-mutma'inna. But what is going to be my, let's say, stage, and what is going to determine my level, am I nafs mutma'inna, or am I going to die as nafs oh man, I would not want to say the details, al-ammara bisu and all of that. I don't want to say that. Okay, but what stage will I die in? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us all die as in nafs al-mutma'inna. All right, Allahumma ameen. Now, the second opinion said that no, this isn't in one person, but not all three are in stages in one person, but one person is classified as he is or she is nafs ammara bisu. Their nafs is always overcoming them. They're always seeking entertainment. They're always seeking whatever feeds their, I guess, their drive of wanting to get entertained. And that's their nafs, that they're always there. And then they become classified as nafs ammara bisu. Or classified as, well, they're always feeling guilty. They do recognize that shortcoming that they would be getting into, but then they would be classified as nafs ammara bisu. Oh, sorry, nafs al-lawama. And then the third person is basically mutma'in. When he's in a crowd, even if there's a fitna, he would basically desert this fitna because he is a nafs mutma'inna. He's basically confident. He's basically strong. He's very content with his Islam, content with the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He doesn't know but one thing, which is that's what I want to follow. He's nafs al-mutma'inna. So now we see this one. So when you say وَلَا تَكْسِبُ كُلُّ نَفْسٍ إِلَّا عَلَيْهَا. In other words, what? So here, Al-Qurtubi wanted to say, well, there are two different matters. Number one is that لا ينفعني في ابتغاء رب غير الله كونكم على ذلك. So what does that mean? That nothing would benefit me in seeking any other Lord. Well, that's what you are basically worshiping, telling the disbelievers, since, of course, me not worshiping your lords is not going to affect me, because anyways, there's no Lord but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anyways. So your Lord does not scare me, because anyways, he's not a Lord. And anyways, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically controls all the power and controls everything. Let's see. And in other words, لا يؤخذ بما أتت من المعصية وركبت من الخطيئة سواها. Okay. So what does it mean? لا تكسب كل نفس إلا عليها. That means every single soul would only harvest what it had basically committed. So what it had committed, like, in other words, what? So you, in general, if you want to do da'wah to others, make sure you don't get dragged in their area, and make sure you basically set your feet on the right thing. Don't get dragged in their area. At the end, they'll be held accountable if they don't want to believe. But don't find yourself in their area without you realizing. Don't put yourself in that area, because at the end, every single soul is going to be held accountable for what they had done. You're not going to be responsible for them. You're going to be responsible for doing da'wah. But if they don't want to accept, then at the end, they'll be the ones held accountable for what they had done. As long as you recognize that you want to live your Islam in order to basically make it to Jannah, keep in mind, لا تكسب كل نفس إلا عليها. You're basically going to be held accountable for what you had committed and not others. Let's see. The second point, this one's quite different. Some scholars actually used and spoke about this ayah to discuss بيع الفضول. What is بيع الفضول? And let me talk about al-Fuduli a little bit. Who's al-Fuduli? Al-Fuduli is a person, some people, they just have this habit. Okay, let me explain it. They're basically, along with people, sometimes it's very common with people that are very extroverted. And people that are extroverted can sometimes, okay, confuse the limitations of where their boundary begins and where it ends. Versus, same thing when we're talking about introverted, same thing. Sometimes they can be strict on where their boundary begins and ends, and that fine area, that fine line between, is this my border, is this their border, all of that, that's that area that sometimes there can be an ebb and flow in how we understand things. So, for example, let's say you're extroverted, and let's say your mother is introverted, or the opposite. You're very introverted and your mother's extroverted. And certainly you would go together. You're very introverted because the implication of that is that you are basically so strict about your boundary and how far it reaches, basically, when it relates to other people. But your mother being extroverted, she basically expands this area, which is the gray area. Maybe I could do it like a line right there. Okay, let's do it as a line. Okay, so here it is. Maybe you can draw this. Okay, and there's this line right there. Yeah, there we go. There's this line right there. And there's another line right there. Okay. Now this area, okay, this area in between these lines, this could be the gray area. Okay, this could be the gray area, which is what I just drew right now. This could be the gray area that sometimes a person that is introverted may sometimes feel uneasy about how far you basically practiced. Is it within my parameter or is it within your parameter? Or can we discuss this parameter and how far are you able to basically be flexible in accepting somebody going within your parameter or outside of your parameter? That's basically al-Fuduli. That is al-Fuduli. Al-Fuduli is basically a person that sometimes in that gray area, in that area of space, sometimes you've got some people, they just have the habit of practicing on your behalf without even you realizing. Let's give an example. You're out in a restaurant and then you're sitting together, you ask for a drink, the other person asks for a drink, and then this person number three, is not really sure about what to ask for. So this Fuduli person comes in, said, you know what? I am so sure you're gonna like mango latte. And the other guy doesn't even know what it is. He's like, you know what? I'm so sure you're gonna like it. Just order it. Yeah, just order him a mango latte. This is Fuduli. He didn't ask you to order it for him, but he just, here it is. This person, basically Fuduli, right there, comes in and says, you know what? I am sure you're gonna like it. You know what? He'll take a mango latte. And you're like, wait a minute, what? Can I just order? I'm sure you're gonna like it. Trust me, you're gonna like it. Just order him a mango latte. This is Fuduli. Sometimes these Fuduli people, it can be a habit that, of course, they can stretch their area of boundary with others that, of course, if this person was an introverted person, definitely not going to feel happy with this practice because they're going to feel that this person stretched their boundary into trespassing into their boundary. That I didn't ask you to order me a mango latte. Why did you order on my behalf? Did I ask you to tell me this? Now, here's one thing, is that many times il-Fuduliyin, these people, they can be very, very nice in their intentions, by the way. They don't always mean harm. They don't, in fact, most of the times, they don't mean harm. They just think they're doing you a favor. They're doing you a favor and they think they're trying to basically take the burden of decision making off of you, and they'll basically, hey, help you and do you a favor and make the decision making on your behalf. But of course, a person that's introverted, you just trespass my boundary. Now, بيع الفضولي, some Sahaba, they did also have at least this personality of being Fuduli and sometimes stretching their boundaries a little bit, let's say. So let's talk about some of that. And of course, the scholars actually had for a person that is probably بيع الفضولي, that is probably stretching his boundary. And now it's so easy to say, okay, well, order this person a mango latte, even though he didn't actually say anything, but he basically, it's so easy for a drink. But what if this person acted in something really big, like using somebody's money? What does that look like? I gave this person $100. And I told this person to buy me with $100, I don't know, some shoes at this place. And I said, it's $100. I know it's $100, or let's say it's $89, and they're going to give you this. I called the company and they basically said, yes, it's available. It's in stock. And I said, you know what, on your way, I'm basically asking you to just get me this shoe with this $100. He goes there. And let's say instead of getting the shoe that I asked him to get, he basically had seen that there was some kind of a sale. And instead of getting me the shoe that I asked for, he thought it would be a better deal for him to buy two of these shoes and instead of getting one shoe of what I was probably comfortable with. Fuduli. He thought, hey, you're getting two for the price of one. That's a good deal. Person A might say, I already know about the sale. I didn't ask you to do that. Do you have the receipt? Let me go and exchange everything. For example, perhaps. Yet, when you look at Bay' al-Fuduli, scholars actually had differences of opinions about this person. Let's call this Bay' al-Fuduli as a person B that basically did the transaction when they were not asked to do it. We just told them to do one thing, which is to basically buy that particular shoe, showed them the picture of it, and told them which one it is and gave them the amount of money just to buy that particular shoe. But then, what happens? Is that transaction that happened between basically person B and also the sales manager or the salesperson, the clerk, whatever, is that a valid transaction or is that a haram transaction? If you say it's a valid transaction, that means this sale complete. If you say it's an invalid transaction, that means that this whole transaction was void and therefore all of this money, we basically have to dismantle the whole transaction right there. But of course, if during our times, he doesn't basically, the sales clerk or whatever, the person, they're not going to ask you, do you own this money? Are you fuduli? What are you doing? No, they're just going to say, oh, here's the money. Here's the money that you are asked to pay for, gives you a receipt, and you basically deal with whatever you had been asked to do. Okay, let's see. For Shafi'i, he basically said that this transaction is not valid. And let's see, the Maliki scholars, they said, well, you actually went far in discussing Bay' al-Fuduli. This ayah is not related to that, but because this ayah was actually talking about reward and sin, not necessarily in this life, but this is actually talking about the hereafter. And that's why the ayah says, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى, that you basically don't add a sin upon another sin. Said it has nothing to do with Bay' al-Fuduli, but since you brought it up, we'll still discuss it, since a lot of the Shafi'is or perhaps other scholars, they basically wanted to talk about this person that is probably extroverted, gone beyond. Okay, we'll still talk about it. So that's where Bay' al-Fuduli, of course, al-Qurtubi wanted to discuss that, and he said it is mawquf ala ijazat al-Malik. So what is it? He said, well, we wouldn't necessarily say it is invalid per se, but we will say if the owner approves this transaction, then in that situation, it basically is going to be considered as approved. What is the story here? Well, they said, we've got an evidence. عروة البارقي قد باع للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم واشترى وتصرف بغير أمره فأجازه النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Well, who's عروة البارقي, and how did we get there? عروة البارقي was a Sahabi. Let's see what happened. So this is the story. Urwatul Bariqi, there was a jalab. What is jalab? So in jalab, there would be these people, they're basically bringing merchandise, could be from India, could be from Yemen, could be from the Levant, and then they would come over, but they're not familiar with the prices in Mecca. So they would come in and basically someone would pass by and say, hey, you selling that? I'll buy it to you for let's say $100. Okay. And he would think that, hey, $100? Yeah, sure. Okay. And he would sell it. But to later discover perhaps that was in this particular area, you sold it for too cheap. This can sell for $500 in this area. That's al-jalab. So sometimes salespeople, they may not be familiar with that area. Of course, currency plays a role, perhaps labor, but a number of different things. They play a role in the merchandise and its prices. That's al-jalab. So let's say the Prophet ﷺ had this person basically, I guess, introduce his merchandise, and the Prophet ﷺ basically gave this Urwa ibn Abil Ja'd or Urwa al-Bariqi. He's the same guy. Urwa ibn Abil Ja'd and Urwa al-Bariqi is basically the same guy. Al-Bariqi is basically attributed to a city or a mountain, actually, a mountain in Yemen. A mountain in Yemen, so you could say he's originally from Yemen, but at the end, he's also Urwa ibn Abi al-Ja'd. So sometimes I could say, for example, Umayya al-Libnaniya, all right? Libnaniya is the Lebanese, is not her family name or her surname, but that's her nationality, okay? And same thing. That's basically using the name as al-Bariqi to basically attribute it to the mountain that they originally come from in Yemen, but Urwa ibn Abi al-Jad is his name. Okay, let's see. So the Prophet ﷺ gives him a dinar, and then he tells Urwa, "I'ti al-jalab, fashtari lana shatan bihadha dinar." He said, go to that jalab, whatever, kind of like a farmer's market or the area that this, I guess, business person is laying out their merchandise. And he gave him 1 dinar, and he said, go and buy one shet, basically one sheep with this dinar. So then Urwa does something else. He goes to this area that they were selling, and then he basically, I guess, discusses with him, and what he managed to do is bargain, and perhaps maybe he said, hey, you get one and you buy one, you get one for free, and that's what he basically did. He managed to bargain, and with this dinar, he managed to get 2 sheep. And then he basically starts taking them. He's, holding them, I guess, maybe tying them, whatever, coming in with these 2 sheep. And then a man in the middle of the way, he said, hey, you want to sell it? You want to sell one of them? And then he said, well, yeah, sure, I'll sell it. So what did he do? He basically sells one of these sheep for a dinar. So now, what did we have? He basically bought 2 sheep with 1 dinar. In the middle of the way, a guy tells him, hey, you want to sell it? He sells one of the sheep for 1 dinar, and then he comes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, well, here's the sheep and here's your dinar. And the Prophet ﷺ was surprised. What did you do? Like, how did you get the dinar is supposed to be selling just one and buying, 1 sheep. And then Urwa ibn Abi al-Jad, he tells him exactly what had happened. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Allahumma barik lahu fi safqati yamineh. Ya Allah, put the blessings in every transaction that he would do. All right. And he said, and I had seen basically the barakah, the blessings of this invocation that the Prophet ﷺ had made for him. He said, I would stand kunasat al-Kufa, like in any market in al-Kufa, a city in al-Iraq, and I would make 40,000, and before even me getting to my family. Now, here's the question. You could see the Prophet ﷺ, he only told him to buy 1 sheep. But he goes, he buys 2, and then even sells another. So he did not just one transaction, but he did a couple transactions. Well, 2 transactions that the Prophet ﷺ did not tell him to do. Okay, now that's that area of discussion. That's that area of debate between the scholars. How do we understand it? Let's say, first of all, Abu Umar, who is basically Ibn Abd al-Barr, he said, هذا حديث جيد. This is a hadith that is jayyid, meaning that it is basically authentic. It's on the authentic area. And he said, and this basically proves that the Prophet ﷺ, even though he basically had that even though the Prophet ﷺ gave him basically to buy one sheep, he basically bought two, and that the Prophet ﷺ technically owned both sheep, even though he was not aware of it, and even though he basically did not give the permission to do so. He saw the deal, buy one, get one free, I guess, or who knows what, or he probably managed to bargain. At the end of the day, he basically did not do as instructed by the Prophet ﷺ and bought two and thought, well, I mean, I'm sure he wouldn't mind. I think he's going to think it's a good deal. And he thought it was a good deal. Definitely thought it was a good deal. What's the evidence? That the Prophet ﷺ made him even a dua of barakah and considered that was a good deal. He got me one sheep and got me even 1 dinar, just with this with this small distance. Some people are really good at business. Okay. And he said if the Prophet ﷺ did not would not have approved this, then the Prophet ﷺ would not have taken the dinar and plus the sheep. He would have considered that, wait a minute, the whole transaction was invalid, and therefore I cannot take that dinar. But did the Prophet ﷺ do that? No, he didn't. He approved a dinar, he approved a sheep, and this Fuduli did not necessarily do something that was, I guess, outside of the Prophet ﷺ's instructions, but he basically took it that I will basically do what is in the interest of that person that I'm working on behalf of. In this case, it was the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, now here's the thing is that some scholars actually said, well, what we understand in this story about Urwa ibn Abi al-Ja'd is not necessarily al-Fuduli, but this is talking about power of attorney. There's no differences of opinions between scholars that acting as a power of attorney, that it is basically permissible, and therefore if the person is buying more than what they were instructed to pay, now differences of opinions. Let's say that there was a dispute. Okay, let's say there was a dispute that this man was instructed to basically buy, let's say, this meat. He was instructed, I want you to buy goat meat, and the pound is, let's say, goat meat, the pound is $3.50, for example. Okay, but then this guy thinks, well, goat meat, $3.50. Look, this guy is selling beef for $1.27. That's a better deal. So what does he do? He basically goes and buys beef. He thought that's too expensive and does the whole thing on his own. Then, of course, in that situation, the other person, he can say, well, that's not what I instructed you to do, but that's okay. That means he approved it. But what if he says, no, biryani is to be cooked with mutton and not with beef? The taste is going to be completely different. You did the wrong thing. I don't use beef for my biryani. Now, the lady at home, she's definitely not going to be happy. And now that she probably soaked the rice already and all of that, now we have to change the whole plan of what we're probably going to be cooking. And of course, that's a different situation. Does that make this power of attorney invalid because the person did not act as instructed, or what does it actually mean? So that's basically that huge debate in how scholars will solve or will probably say that the whole transaction was actually an invalid transaction, and basically the person that acted based on his own, I guess, decision making and did not act based on what he was instructed to do, then in that situation, we're going to tell this guy that bought the wrong item, we're going to say, let's say we go back to the market and we say, sorry, but can I return this? And he said, sorry, no returns allowed. Uh-oh. No return allowed. I got the receipt. No return allowed. Or the way that Malaysians would do, cannot. That's it. Once they tell you cannot, there's no debate. There's no question, no argument. That's it. Cannot, they wouldn't even discuss it. Okay. Now, in this situation, Okay. In this situation, will the person that acted on his own be responsible for the transaction? Meaning, I will say, I need the money that I gave you back and you owe it to me. I gave you $100 to buy sheep or goat meat, okay, mutton, whatever it is, and you did not buy it. I'd like my $100 back. And you know what? That beef that you bought, congratulations. At least you have something to cook for tonight. Are we going to do that? Or are we going to say, well, how can we reconciliate? What should we do? That's that whole debate between scholars, just to let us know. Now, we're going to end and stop right here. And you could see we're stopping at وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. And inshallah, let's see, what else? What does wizr mean? What does a wazir mean? What does wazara and izar, or is it even part of it? Isra. What does that mean? So we'll be doing that inshallah. I really want to do it tomorrow. So we can, inshallah, expect probably maybe tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to be doing tomorrow our tafsir or not, but just to let us know. So inshallah, either tomorrow, you may see a pop-up of doing our tafsir tomorrow, and you may see that we just are going to be doing it on Monday, or at least my Monday, your Sunday. So stay tuned. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. No questions. Okay, let me just stop the live stream, inshallah, right